The cantina was dark and smoky. Strange aliens from different worlds sat at tables drinking and talking quietly. In the far corner, a large figure sat alone. His body looked like a giant insect with thick armor plates covering his skin. One of his arms was missing and deep scars ran across his face. Commander Vextar had been sitting in the same spot for 3 hours. The drink in front of him was barely touched. His large compound eyes stared at nothing, lost in memories he wished he could forget. A young female of his species walked over. She was small and moved carefully. Her armor plates were clean and bright, showing she had never been in real combat. She carried a recording device in her hand. "Commander Vextar?" she asked softly. He looked up slowly. "What do you want?" "My name is Kira. I work for the Galactic News Network. I want to ask you about the human war." Vextar made a sound that might have been laughter, but there was no joy in it. "The human war, is that what they call it now?" "Yes, sir. The records show you fought in many battles against the humans. People want to know what really happened." Vextar picked up his drink and took a long sip. The liquid burned as it went down. "Sit down, child. But understand this. What I tell you will give you nightmares." Kira sat across from him and turned on her recorder. "I need to know the truth. The truth." Vextar's scarred face twisted. "The truth is that we thought humans were weak. We thought they were just another primitive species that would bow before the might of the Reelan Empire." He paused and looked around the cantina. Other aliens were listening now, though they pretended not to. "I have fought across 17 star systems," Vextar continued. "I have seen creatures that breathe fire and worlds that try to eat your ship. I have faced enemies that could tear apart a battle cruiser with their bare hands. But humans—" He stopped and shook his head. "Humans are different." "Different how?" Kira asked. "They do not fight like other species. When most races face a superior enemy, they surrender or run. It makes sense. Why die when you can live to fight another day? But humans—" He took another drink. "Humans fight like every battle is their last." Vextar's mind went back to that first encounter. The memory was as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "We found them by accident," he said. "Our scouts detected a single ship moving through the Kepler system. It was huge but slow, a colony vessel carrying families to start a new life on some distant world. What did you do?" "What we always did. We sent a fleet to intercept them. 300 of our best warships against one civilian transport. We expected them to surrender immediately when they saw our forces." Vexitar remembered the moment their ships dropped out of hyperspace around the human vessel. The colony ship looked like a floating city. It was 5 kilometers long and carried 50,000 people. Men, women, children, all hoping to build new homes on a distant planet. "We sent them the standard message," Vextar said. "Surrender your ship and prepare to be processed." Some would become slaves, others would be sold to different worlds. It was nothing personal, just business. But they didn't surrender. "No." Vextar's voice grew quiet. "Instead, we received a message from their captain. His name was Lee Dong-wook. The message was simple and calm. He said, 'This is Captain Lee Dong-wook of the UES New Seoul. You will not harm these colonists. Turn back now.'" Kira leaned forward. "Just like that?" "Just like that. No begging, no offers to negotiate. Just a simple statement. At first we thought it was a joke. Our fleet commander laughed and ordered the attack to begin." Vextar remembered how confident they had all felt. The humans had no warships, no weapons that could hurt them. It should have been over in minutes. "We moved in to disable their engines," he continued. "Standard procedure. Once they couldn't run, we would board the ship and take control. Simple and clean. What happened? The first surprise was when they started shooting back. Not with military weapons, but with mining equipment, construction tools, anything they could turn into a weapon. The second surprise was that they were actually hitting our ships." Vexitar closed his eyes and could still see the flashes of light as improvised weapons struck his fleet. The humans had somehow turned their entire colony ship into a fortress. "How is that possible?" Kira asked. "We learned later that they had been preparing for months. Every person on that ship had a job in the defense. The engineers, led by a man named Park Hyun-woo, had modified every piece of equipment they could find. Teachers like Kim So-ra were manning defense positions. Even the children were helping move supplies and tend to the wounded." The young journalist looked shocked. "Children?" "Human children grow up differently than ours," Vextar explained. "By the time they are 12 or 13 years old, they can handle complex tasks. And when their families are threatened, They become as dangerous as any adult. He remembered the first boarding party his forces had sent over, 20 of his best soldiers in full combat armor, expecting to face scared civilians. Instead, they found organized resistance at every turn. Every corridor was trapped, Vextar said. Every room was defended. The humans had turned their own home into a maze of death, and they all knew they were going to die. How could you tell? Because they were singing. Kira's recording device nearly slipped from her hands. Singing? Human battle songs. Old songs from their homeworld about heroes who died protecting their people. They sang as they fought and they sang as they died. I had never heard anything like it. Vextar remembered the sound echoing through the corridors of the colony ship, voices raised in harmony even as explosions tore apart their world around them. The worst part was that they were not afraid. Fear makes sense. Fear keeps you alive. But these humans looked at our soldiers and smiled. They welcomed death if it meant protecting their families. Did you win? Vextar was quiet for a long time. Finally, he nodded. Yes, we won. We took the ship and captured what was left of the colonists. But it felt like a defeat. Why? Because of what it cost us. We lost 3 ships and 800 soldiers, taking 1 civilian vessel, and the humans made sure we remembered every single death. Vexitar finished his drink and signaled for another. The cantina had grown completely quiet now. Every alien in the place was listening to his story. That was just the beginning, he said softly. After that first battle, everything changed. The Rillan High Command was embarrassed. They decided to make an example of humanity. They wanted to show the galaxy what happened to species that defied us. What did they do? Vextar looked directly at Kira. They declared war on the entire human race, and that child was the biggest mistake in the history of our empire. Vextar ordered another drink and waited for the server to move away before continuing his story. The cantina had grown even quieter. Other patrons had moved closer to hear better. After the colony ship incident, our leaders were angry, he began. We had never lost so many soldiers to a single civilian vessel. The High Command wanted revenge. Kira adjusted her recording device. What did they do? They sent the 7th Battle Fleet. 5,000 ships, 2 million soldiers. The largest military force our empire had ever assembled. Their target was the human homeworld system. Vextar remembered the briefing before the attack. The fleet commanders had been confident, even excited. They spoke of easy victory and quick promotion. None of them understood what they were really facing. I was promoted after the colony ship battle, Vextar continued. They made me a ground assault commander. My job was to lead the boarding parties that would capture human ships and stations. Were you excited? At first, yes. I thought we would show these humans the true power of the Rillan Empire. I thought they would see our fleet and surrender immediately. The first target had been a human mining station in the outer system. It was small, maybe 3,000 people. Workers and their families extracting rare metals from asteroids. It should have been simple. We surrounded the station with 50 ships, Vextar said. Our commander sent the usual surrender demand. The humans had 1 hour to give up or we would destroy them. Did they surrender? Vextar made that bitter laughing sound again. The station commander was a woman named Dr. Choi Min-ho. She was a doctor who took care of sick children. When our demand came in, she sent back a video message. He paused to take a drink. His hands shook slightly as he lifted the glass. In the video, she was sitting in her medical bay. Behind her, we could see human children playing with toys. She looked directly into the camera and said, "We are not warriors. We are miners and doctors and teachers. But if you try to hurt these children, we will show you what humans do to monsters." That was it? That was it. No fear, no begging. Just a simple promise. The attack had begun exactly 1 hour later. Vextar led the first boarding party through the station's docking bay. They expected to find hiding civilians and maybe a few security guards with small weapons. Instead, they found a war zone. Every corridor had been turned into a killing field, Vextar explained. The miners had used their equipment to set up barriers and traps. Workers who had never held a weapon in their lives were fighting like professional soldiers. He remembered advancing through the station's main hallway. The walls were covered with children's drawings and family pictures. It made the violence seem even more horrible. The first person I met was a janitor named Yoon Jae-sung. He was old, maybe 60 years by their standards. He should have been hiding with the other civilians, and what was he doing? He was standing in the middle of the corridor, holding a maintenance tool that he had turned into a weapon. When he saw my soldiers, he smiled and said hello like we were friends visiting his home. Vextar could still see the old man's face clearly. Calm, friendly, completely unafraid of the armed soldiers surrounding him. We told him to surrender. He nodded politely and then activated a bomb he had made from cleaning chemicals. The explosion killed 12 of my soldiers and brought down half the ceiling. The fighting had continued for 6 hours. Every room was defended, every corner held a trap. The humans fought with tools and improvised weapons, but they fought with the skill of experienced warriors. How did they learn to fight so well? Kira asked. We learned later that they had been practicing. As soon as word spread about the colony ship attack, every human settlement began preparing for war. Doctors learned to use surgical tools as weapons. Teachers studied military tactics. Even children were taught how to set traps and hide bombs. The worst moment had come when Vextar's team reached the medical bay. Dr. Choi was still there, treating wounded civilians. She looked up when the soldiers entered and smiled. She was holding a small device in her hand, Vextar said, a medical scanner that she had turned into a weapon. But instead of threatening us, she kept working on her patients. What did you do? My soldiers tried to stun her so we could take her prisoner. She was just a doctor, not a soldier. We thought she would be valuable for questioning. Vextar's voice grew very quiet. Instead, she looked at the children around her and whispered something we could not understand. Later, we learned it was a human prayer. Then she activated the explosive vest she was wearing under her medical coat. The explosion had destroyed the entire medical bay. Dr. Choi died instantly, along with 3 Rillan soldiers. But somehow all the human children in the room survived. She had positioned herself to shield them with her own body. I do not understand, Kira said. Why would she kill herself? Because she was protecting something more important than her own life, Vextar explained. Humans have a saying, no one fights harder than a mother protecting her cubs. Dr. Choi was not the mother of those children, but she died like she was. The battle for the mining station had ended with the humans' defeat, but Vexitar's forces had paid a terrible price. What should have been a simple occupation had cost them 300 soldiers and 2 ships. And that was just the beginning. Vextar continued. Every human station, every settlement, every ship fought the same way. They never surrendered, never gave up, never showed fear. How did they coordinate their defense so well? We learned that humans had something we did not expect. They had a communication network that connected every human settlement in the galaxy. When we attacked one place, all the others learned our tactics immediately. The network was run by people like Communications Officer Jung Hanul, who had been a teacher before the war. She organized the sharing of information between human settlements, making sure everyone learned from each battle. Every time we adapted our tactics, they adapted faster, Vextar said. Every time we found a weakness in their defenses, they found a weakness in ours. The human defenders had another advantage that Vextar only understood later. They were fighting on their own territory, defending their own homes. Every corridor, every room, every hiding place was familiar to them. A maintenance worker named Lim Seung-ho held off an entire battalion of our soldiers for 2 days, Vextar said. He used his knowledge of the station's systems to cut power, redirect life support, and trap our forces in areas where they could not retreat. One man stopped a battalion. He knew every pipe, every wire, every weak spot in the station structure. He turned the entire facility into a weapon. When we finally cornered him, he had killed over 100 of our soldiers using nothing but engineering knowledge and determination. But the most disturbing thing about the human defenders was not their tactics or their weapons. It was their attitude. They treated the war like it was their job, Vextar explained. Not something they enjoyed, but something that had to be done. Like fixing a broken machine or treating a sick patient. They were not angry? Oh, they were angry. But it was a cold anger, controlled and focused. They did not rage or scream or lose their minds. They just methodically set about killing us as efficiently as possible. Vextar remembered intercepting a human communication during one battle. A woman named Kim So-ra was talking to her daughter who was hiding in a shelter. The conversation was calm and normal, discussing school and friends and dinner plans. In the background, explosions and weapons fire could be heard. She was discussing what to cook for dinner while shooting at my soldiers, Vextar said, as if war was just another task to complete before going home to her family. The Rillan forces had eventually won every battle in that first campaign. They had destroyed dozens of human settlements and captured thousands of prisoners. But the cost had been enormous. We lost more soldiers in 3 months of fighting humans than we had in the previous 10 years of conquering other species, Vextar said, and the humans made sure we remembered every death. How? They recorded everything. Every battle, every death, every act of heroism. They broadcast these recordings to other human settlements, but also to us. They wanted us to see what we were doing, and they wanted us to see what they were willing to do to stop us. Vextar finished his second drink and stared at the empty glass. Around them, the cantina was completely silent. Every alien present was hanging on his every word. That was when we began to understand, he said quietly. We were not fighting an army. We were fighting an entire species that had decided we were their enemy, and when humans decide you are their enemy, they do not stop until one of you is dead. The server brought Vextar another drink, but he ignored it. His compound eyes were focused on something far away, lost in memories that clearly still caused him pain. The High Command was not pleased with our progress, he continued. We were winning battles but losing too many soldiers. They decided we needed to send a stronger message. Kira waited patiently for him to continue. Around them, the other patrons had stopped pretending they were not listening. They chose a target that would break human morale, Vextar said. An industrial world called New Busan. It had factories that made ships and weapons for the human colonies. 15 million people lived there. He paused and finally took a sip of his fresh drink. The plan was simple. We would destroy their military production and enslave the population. It would show other human worlds what happened when they defied the Rillan Empire. How many ships did you send? The entire 7th Battle Fleet. 5,000 warships, 2 million soldiers. I was given command of all ground forces. Vextar's scarred face showed a mixture of pride and regret. It was the largest promotion of my career. The fleet had arrived at New Busan expecting another difficult but winnable battle. The planet had some defense satellites and a small patrol fleet. Nothing that could stand against a force the size of the 7th Fleet. Their system commander was Colonel Nayunji, Vextar said. She had fought in human civil wars before they met us. When we sent our surrender demand, she did something that still gives me nightmares. What did she do? She sent us a video of herself eating dinner with her family. Her husband, her 2 children, her elderly parents. They were sitting at their kitchen table talking and laughing like it was a normal evening. Vextar remembered watching that video on the fleet command ship. The human family looked so ordinary, so peaceful. Behind them, through their window, the lights of orbital bombardment could be seen in the sky. She was completely calm, he continued. She cut her food, helped her children with their meal, listened to her father tell a story. And all around them, our weapons were lighting up the night sky as we destroyed their orbital defenses. Was she trying to show you that humans were not afraid? No, Vextar said quietly. She was showing us what we were really fighting. Not soldiers, not warriors, families, people who just wanted to live their lives in peace. The ground invasion had begun 3 days later. Vextar led the first wave of assault troops, expecting to face the usual mix of civilian defenders and military units. Instead, they found that the entire planet had become a weapon. Every factory had been converted into a fortress, he explained. The worker Lim Sung-ho had reprogrammed all the manufacturing equipment to build weapons and defensive systems instead of civilian goods. Just one person did all that? Humans have a talent for organization that we underestimated. Lim Sung-ho was an engineer, but he coordinated with thousands of other workers. They turned assembly lines that made ground cars into factories that produced combat drones. The drones had been the first surprise. Small, fast, and nearly invisible, they attacked Rillan forces constantly. But these were not military drones built by professional soldiers. They were made by factory workers using industrial equipment. Each drone was different, Vextar said. Some carried explosives, others had cutting tools. Still others just rammed into our soldiers and equipment. But they all had one thing in common. They were completely expendable. Like the humans who built them? Exactly. The humans had learned to think of war as a production problem. They needed to destroy a certain number of our soldiers and vehicles. So they built machines to do it as efficiently as possible. But the drones were just one part of the planet's defenses. The civilians had also been organized into an effective resistance force. A school teacher named An Ji-won had turned the entire education system into a military training program, Vextar explained. Children as young as 10 knew how to set traps, hide weapons, and coordinate attacks. Children were fighting? Not directly, but they were part of the defensive network. They carried messages, moved supplies, and provided intelligence. And when our soldiers tried to capture them for questioning, the children had been trained to activate small explosive devices. Vextar remembered the first time one of his patrols had tried to question a human child. The boy looked maybe 12 years old, scared and alone in the ruins of his school. When the Rillan soldiers approached, he smiled and said hello in their language. The child had been taught basic words in our language, Vextar said. He asked if we were hungry, if we needed help. My soldiers thought he was an innocent civilian who could give us information about human defenses. What happened? When they got close, he activated a small device hidden in his school bag. The explosion was not large enough to kill anyone, but it marked our soldiers with a chemical that made them visible to human weapon systems. Within minutes, automated defense systems were targeting my entire patrol. The human defenders had turned every aspect of their society into part of the war effort. Doctors treated wounded fighters and developed new medicines to help them fight longer. Teachers shared tactical knowledge and coordinated civilian activities. Even entertainers played a role. They had singers and storytellers who traveled between defended areas, Vextar said. These people shared news of victories and defeats, keeping morale high even when the situation looked hopeless. How did entertainment help them fight? Humans fight better when they believe in what they are fighting for. The entertainers reminded them of their families, their homes, their culture. They made sure every human fighter knew that someone would remember their sacrifice. But the most disturbing example of human determination came during the siege of the planet's main industrial complex. The facility was defended by a mixture of workers and soldiers, led by a young private named Tai-Jin. He was 18 years old, Vextar said, barely an adult by human standards. He should have been afraid, should have tried to surrender or escape when he saw our overwhelming force. What did he do instead? Vextar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. He volunteered to be infected with a biological weapon. Kira nearly dropped her recording device. What? The humans had captured one of our bioweapons in an earlier battle. Their scientists had studied it and learned how to modify it. The modified version would kill the carrier slowly, but would be highly contagious to Rillan soldiers. He infected himself on purpose. He knew it would kill him within days. He knew he would suffer, but he also knew that every Rillan soldier he came in contact with would carry the infection back to our ships and bases. Tai-Jin had spent his last 3 days of life hunting Rillan patrols. He moved through the industrial complex like a ghost, attacking soldiers and then disappearing before they could respond. But he was not trying to kill them directly. He would wound a few soldiers in each attack, then vanish, Vextar explained. The wounded soldiers would be treated by our medical teams and returned to duty. They had no idea they were carrying a weapon that would spread to everyone they met. How many soldiers did he infect? Over 2,000. The outbreak forced us to quarantine 3 entire regiments. Some of our ships had to be abandoned when the infection spread to their crews. But what haunted Vextar most was not the tactical success of the attack. It was the recording Tai-Jin had left behind. He made a video message for his family, Vextar said. In it, he apologized for not being able to come home. He told his parents that he loved them and was proud to serve. He asked them to take care of his younger sister and to remember him with joy, not sadness. He was not angry about dying. He was sad but not angry. He spoke about his life, his dreams, the things he would miss. But he never complained about his fate or cursed his enemies. He simply accepted what he had to do. The battle for New Busan had lasted 3 months. In the end, the Rillan forces had achieved their objectives. The planet's industrial capacity was destroyed, and most of the population was either dead or captured, but the cost had been enormous. We lost over 2 million soldiers taking that one world, Vextar said, more than we had ever lost in a single campaign. And somehow the humans had evacuated their most important equipment and personnel before we arrived. How did they manage that? They had been planning for defeat from the moment our fleet arrived. While their fighters held us off, transport ships were moving critical resources to safer locations. They saved what they could and fought to give the evacuations time to succeed. Vextar finished his 3rd drink and signaled for another. His hands were steadier now, but his voice remained quiet. That was when I began to understand what we were really fighting, he said. We thought humans were like other species. They would fight when they had to, but would give up when the cost became too high. But they were different? Humans do not fight to win. They fight to make sure their enemies remember the cost of fighting them. Every battle was designed to hurt us as much as possible, even when they knew they would lose. Around the cantina, other aliens were nodding. Many of them had heard rumors about the human war, but few had spoken to someone who had actually fought in it. "We won every battle on New Busan," Vextar said. "But it felt like a defeat, and the humans made sure we knew that they were just getting started." Vextar stared at his drink without touching it. The cantina had grown completely quiet now. Even the background music had stopped, as if the building itself was listening to his story. "By the second year of the war, something had changed," he began. "We were still winning individual battles, but we were losing the war." "How is that possible?" Kira asked. "Because humans learn from every defeat. Every battle we won taught them something new about how we fight, how we think, how we can be beaten." Vextar remembered the first sign that the war was changing. Intelligence reports had started coming in about human activities in the Kepler Nebula, a region of space filled with unstable energy fields and dangerous radiation. "Our scouts reported seeing human ships entering the nebula," he said. "At first we thought they were hiding. The nebula interfered with our sensors, so it seemed like a good place for them to avoid our patrols." "Were they hiding?" "No, they were preparing." Vextar's scarred face showed something that might have been respect. Their new fleet commander was Admiral Bei Sujin. She had studied every battle of the war, analyzed every defeat, learned from every mistake. The Rillan High Command had decided to end the human threat once and for all. They gathered the largest fleet in their history and sent it to destroy the human forces hiding in the nebula. 12,000 ships, Vextar said. 3 million soldiers. Every experienced commander, every elite unit, every advanced weapon we possessed. It should have been the end of human resistance, but it was not. Vextar made that bitter laughing sound again. Admiral Bei had been waiting for us to make exactly that decision. She wanted us to send everything we had to one place. The battle had begun normally enough. The Rillan fleet entered the nebula and began searching for human ships. The energy fields made their sensors unreliable, but they had so many ships that it should not have mattered. "We found them on the third day," Vextar said. "A human fleet maybe 1/4 the size of ours, hiding near an unstable star. They were trapped with nowhere to run. What did they do? They attacked us." The words hung in the air for a moment. Around the cantina, other aliens shifted uncomfortably. The idea of a smaller force attacking a larger one went against every military principle they knew. Admiral Bei had studied our psychology, our tactics, everything about how we fight, Vextar continued. She knew we would expect them to run or try to hide. She knew we would not be prepared for a direct assault. But the human attack was unlike anything the Rillans had ever faced. Instead of trying to engage the entire fleet at once, the humans had used the nebula's gravitational fields to accelerate their ships to incredible speeds. "They came at us like missiles," Vextar explained, using the unstable star's gravity to slingshot their ships faster than our weapons could track. They were not trying to win a traditional battle. They were trying to cause as much damage as possible before we could respond. Did it work? The first wave destroyed our command ship and killed Fleet Admiral Grathvin. The second wave targeted our support vessels, the ships that carried fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. The third wave went after our communication relays. Within 2 hours, the massive Rillan fleet had been reduced to scattered groups of ships that could not coordinate their actions. The humans had not destroyed most of the fleet, but they had made it impossible for the Rillans to fight effectively. But the worst was yet to come, Vextar said. Captain Quan Hyuk commanded one of their cruisers. His ship had been badly damaged in the first attack and was losing life support. What did he do? He could have retreated. His ship was too damaged to continue fighting, and his crew was dying from radiation poisoning. Any reasonable commander would have withdrawn to save his people's lives. Vextar paused to take a sip of his drink. His hand shook slightly as he lifted the glass. Instead, Captain Quan sealed himself in the ship's engine room and manually piloted his cruiser into our flagship's reactor core. The explosion destroyed both ships and killed over 50,000 Rillan soldiers. He flew his ship into yours on purpose? Yes. But before he did, he opened a communication channel to our fleet. He spoke calmly, like he was discussing the weather. He said, "This is Captain Quan of the human cruiser Incheon. I want you to remember this moment. Remember that we chose to die rather than let you win." The destruction of the flagship had been the turning point of the battle. The remaining Rillan ships had tried to regroup, but the humans had been ready for that too. They had hidden additional ships throughout the nebula, Vextar said. Small groups that attacked our scattered forces and then disappeared again. We spent days hunting shadows while our casualties mounted. But what disturbed Vextar most was not the tactical brilliance of the human strategy. It was the attitude of the human soldiers they captured. We took a few prisoners during the battle, he said. One was Lieutenant Seo Min-jun. He had been wounded when his ship was destroyed, but he was still conscious when we brought him aboard. Did you interrogate him? We tried. But instead of answering our questions, he started talking to us about our own weaknesses. He explained exactly how the human counterattack would proceed, what targets they would hit next, how long it would take us to recover from our losses. The young human officer had not been threatening or angry. He had spoken like a teacher explaining a lesson to students, calm and patient even though he was a prisoner facing death. Everything he predicted came true, Vextar said. Within hours, human forces were attacking our supply bases exactly where he said they would. Our reinforcements were intercepted exactly when he said they would be. It was like he could see the future. How was that possible? Because humans understand psychology better than we do. Lieutenant Seo knew how our commanders would react to each situation. He had studied our previous battles and could predict our responses. The Battle of the Kepler Nebula had ended with the destruction of most of the Rillan fleet. Of the 12,000 ships that entered the nebula, fewer than 3,000 escaped. It was the worst military defeat in Rillan history. But the worst part was not the ships we lost, Vextar said. It was the effect on our soldiers' morale. What do you mean? For the first time in our empire's history, Rillan soldiers began to fear their enemies. Word spread through our military about the humans who sang as they died, who turned their ships into weapons. Who could predict our every move? Vextar remembered the change in his own troops after the Nebula battle. Soldiers who had once been eager for combat now hesitated when facing human opponents. Some even requested transfers to other fronts rather than continue fighting humans. Humans had learned to use fear as a weapon, he explained, not by being cruel or violent, but by being completely unpredictable. They would sacrifice everything to achieve their goals, and that terrified us. The psychological warfare was as effective as the physical battles. Humans began broadcasting messages to Rillan forces before each attack. The messages were not threats or propaganda, but simple statements of fact delivered by people like Communications Officer Jung Hanul. She would describe exactly what was about to happen, Vextar said. Which ships would be destroyed, how many soldiers would die, how long the battle would last. And she was always right. Why did they tell you their plans? Because they wanted us to know that resistance was hopeless. They wanted us to understand that every battle would cost us more than we could afford to lose. But perhaps the most disturbing thing about the human broadcasts was their tone. Jung Hanul spoke like she was reading a weather report, calm and matter-of-fact about death and destruction. She never sounded angry or excited, Vextar said. She talked about killing thousands of our soldiers the same way she might talk about preparing dinner. It was just a task that needed to be completed. After the Kepler Nebula disaster, the Rillan High Command had tried to negotiate a ceasefire. They sent diplomatic messages offering to withdraw from human space in exchange for an end to hostilities. The human response was simple, Vextar said. They thanked us for our offer and said they would consider it after they had dealt with our remaining forces. They refused to negotiate? They said they were willing to talk, but only after they had removed our ability to threaten them again. They wanted to make sure we could never restart the war when it was convenient for us. The human counteroffensive had begun immediately after their victory in the nebula, but instead of attacking Rillan military bases directly, they targeted something more important, the Empire's economy. They attacked our trade routes, our mining operations, our supply lines, Vextar said. Every ship that carried food or fuel or manufactured goods became a target. They were trying to starve you out? Worse, they were showing our civilian population that their military could not protect them. Every successful attack made more people question whether the war was worth fighting. Vextar finished his drink and looked around the cantina. The other patrons were still listening intently, but some of them looked uncomfortable. The idea of a smaller, weaker species defeating a galactic empire challenged everything they believed about power and strength. That was when I began to understand the truth, he said quietly. We had not been fighting a war. We had. Vextar sat in silence for several minutes, staring at his empty glass. The cantina around him was completely quiet, except for the soft hum of life support systems. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. The war's true turning point came during what humans call the liberation of New Jeju. He began. We had established a prison camp there for human civilians. Families of soldiers, captured colonists, anyone we thought might be useful for information or trade negotiations. Kira leaned forward. What happened? The humans came to rescue their people. But what they did there changed everything, not just about the war, but about how I understood what humans really are. Vextar had been commanding the prison camp's defenses when the human rescue mission arrived. The facility held nearly 100,000 human prisoners on a heavily fortified planet. It should have been impossible to attack successfully. The camp was surrounded by energy shields, automatic weapons, and 3 divisions of our best soldiers, he explained. We had orbital defense platforms and a fleet of patrol ships. Any attack would have to overcome massive defenses to reach the prisoners. How many humans attacked? We detected maybe 50 ships approaching the planet. A tiny force compared to our defenses. At first we thought it was a scouting mission or perhaps a desperate suicide attack. The human force was led by Major Han Woo-jin, a career military officer who had lost his own family in an earlier Rillan attack. Intelligence reports suggested he was driven by personal revenge as much as military duty. We expected a direct assault, Vextar said. The humans had shown a preference for aggressive tactics in previous battles. We were prepared for them to throw everything they had at our strongest positions. But they did not attack directly. No, they did something we never expected. They waited. For 3 days, the human ships remained just outside the planet's defense perimeter. They made no aggressive moves, sent no demands, gave no indication of their intentions. They simply watched and waited. On the 4th day, we realized our mistake, Vextar continued. The humans were not planning to attack our defenses. They had already bypassed them. Captain Song Ye-jin had led a small team that infiltrated the planet's surface weeks before the rescue fleet arrived. Using intelligence gathered from previous battles, they had identified every weakness in the camp's security systems. She was a demolitions expert who had learned to think like an engineer, Vextar explained. Instead of trying to break through our defenses, she quietly disabled them from the inside. How? Small changes that we never noticed. A sensor here. A power coupling there, communication relays that worked perfectly until the moment she wanted them to fail. When the rescue mission began, our defenses simply stopped working. But the most disturbing part of the rescue mission was not its technical brilliance. It was the attitude of the human rescuers toward their enemies. Dr. Ryu Sang-wook was with the rescue team, Vextar said. He was a civilian volunteer, a medical doctor who had come to treat wounded prisoners. When the fighting started, he moved through the camp completely exposed, never taking cover, never hiding. Was he not afraid of being shot? He was treating wounded humans in the middle of a battle zone. Our soldiers could see him clearly, could have killed him easily, but somehow no one fired at him. Vextar remembered watching the human doctor through his command center's monitors. Dr. Ryu moved from building to building, carrying medical supplies and treating injured prisoners, completely ignoring the weapons fire around him. He looked directly at our soldiers and nodded politely, like he was greeting neighbors on a peaceful street. Some of my men tried to aim their weapons at him, but they found they could not pull the trigger. Why not? Because he was so obviously there to help people, not to fight. He carried no weapons, made no threatening moves. He was just a doctor doing his job, and even in the middle of a war, something inside us recognized that. But while Dr. Ryu was treating the wounded, the rescue mission was proceeding with deadly efficiency. The human soldiers moved through the camp like they had trained there for years, knowing exactly where to go and what to do. They had studied our camp layout, our guard rotations, even our individual commanders' personalities, Vextar said. They knew us better than we knew ourselves. The most disturbing example came when Vextar encountered a young human soldier named Private Kang Da-yoon. She was barely out of training, maybe 19 years old, and had been assigned to help evacuate civilian prisoners. I found her in the camp's main courtyard, surrounded by 20 of my best soldiers, Vextar said. She was wounded and running out of ammunition, but she was still protecting a group of human children who were too scared to move. What did she do? Vextar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice shook slightly. She activated her suit's emergency beacon and spoke into her communication device. She said, "This is Private Kang Da-eun. I am about to be overrun. Remember what they did here? Then she detonated every explosive device she carried. The explosion killed 47 Rillan soldiers, including some of Vextar's most experienced officers. But more importantly, it sent a message that was received by every human unit in the system. Within minutes, every human rescue team had heard her final words, Vextar said. The message spread through their communication network to ships throughout the galaxy. And everything changed. And how? The rescue mission became something else. The humans stopped trying to simply evacuate the prisoners. They began systematically destroying everything we had built on that planet. What had started as a surgical rescue operation became a methodical campaign of destruction. Human forces attacked every Rillan position on the planet, broadcasting Private Kang's final words before each assault. They hunted us like animals, Vextar said, not with rage or hatred, but with the same calm efficiency they had shown throughout the war. They simply decided we needed to be eliminated, and they set about doing it. The human forces were led by Major Hanwu Jin, but they were coordinated by dozens of specialists who had studied every aspect of Rillan military culture. They knew how Rillan soldiers thought, how they would react to different situations, how to predict their every move. They did not just defeat us, Vextar said. They demonstrated complete superiority in every aspect of warfare. Tactics, technology, psychology, logistics, they were better at everything. The most chilling moment came when Vextar tried to establish a defensive perimeter around the camp's command center. His remaining forces had taken positions in what should have been an impregnable fortress. A human officer approached under a white flag, he said. She walked calmly across the battlefield, completely exposed, carrying no weapons. When she reached our perimeter, she asked to speak with me personally. What did she want? Her name was Captain Park Ju-young. She was maybe 30 years old, with the calm manner of someone discussing routine business. She told me exactly what was going to happen next. Captain Park had explained that the human forces had already surrounded the command center and identified every weakness in its defenses. She gave Vextar a detailed timeline of how the attack would proceed and exactly how many Rillan soldiers would die in each phase. She was not threatening us, Vextar said. She was simply providing information, like a weather report or a shipping schedule. She spoke about the deaths of my soldiers the same way she might discuss lunch plans. Why did she tell you? Because she wanted us to understand that resistance was pointless. She wanted us to know that every death from that point forward would be our choice, not theirs. But Captain Park had also offered an alternative. She explained that the human forces were prepared to allow the surviving Rillan soldiers to evacuate safely, on one condition. She said we could leave, but we would carry a message back to our empire, Vextar said. We would tell them exactly what we had seen, exactly what humans were capable of when their people were threatened. Did you accept? What choice did we have? She had already demonstrated that they could kill us all whenever they wanted. The offer to let us live was an act of mercy we did not deserve. The evacuation had proceeded exactly as Captain Park had described. Human forces provided safe passage for the surviving Rillan soldiers, even giving them medical supplies and food for the journey home. But they made sure we understood the message we were carrying, Vextar said. Every ship's computer had been accessed and rewritten. Every personal file had been downloaded and analyzed. Every tactical database had been copied. They were spying on you. More than that, they were showing us that they knew everything about us. Our military codes, our fleet positions, our officers' personal information. They wanted us to know that they had complete intelligence, superiority. The most disturbing detail was that the humans had personal information about individual Rillan soldiers and their families back home. Captain Park asked me about my clutch siblings by name, Vextar said. She knew about my mother's health problems, recommended doctors on my homeworld who might be able to help. She discussed my family like she was a friend who had known them for years. How was that possible? Humans understand that information is power. They had studied not just our military capabilities, but our entire culture. They knew how we lived, what we valued, what we feared.